What happens when Hollywood's toughest legend gets pushed too far by a host who's forgotten his place? And woo, he's in. It's 41 seconds of silence. Graham Norton's trademark smirk would vanish as Clint Eastwood rose from his chair and walked off the set, leaving the host speechless and humiliated in front of millions. The studio had felt electric from the moment. Clint Eastwood stepped onto the stage, calm, collected, every movement precise. The audience erupted in applause for a man whose films, characters, and presence had defined generations. He settled into the bright red chair, nodding politely at Graham Norton, who greeted him with that signature cheeky grin. At first, the conversation was standard fare. Clint answering questions about his latest project with his usual brevity and measured calm. He wasn't here to perform. He was here to discuss his work, respect the craft, and leave on his own terms. Simple as that. Then Norton shifted. The questions became personal, invasive, edged with mockery. He started joking about Clint's age, how long he'd been in the business. The audience laughed nervously. Clint's jaw tightened, but his composure held. He'd seen it all before, enough to handle a jab or two. So, Clint, Norton leaned in, grin widening. You've been making films since what? The Stone Age. Do you ever think about just calling it quits? Letting the younger generation take over? The laughter died in the room. Tension coiled like a spring. Clint met Norton's gaze with steely, iced same eyes that had stared down countless villains on screen. He paused, measured. I'll quit when I feel like quitting, not when someone else thinks I should. Norton laughed it off, but the edge was visible now. He was accustomed to compliance, to guests who played along with his little games. Clint Eastwood was no one's pawn, but Norton pressed, emboldened by the audience's nervous energy. Surely you see it, Clint. The industry's changed. Maybe it's passed you by. Maybe your style of filmmaking is, well, a little outdated. The air grew heavy. Even the other guests shifted in their seats. This was no longer playful. Banter. It was a public undermining of a legend for cheap laughs. Clint remained still, neutral, but the warning signs were there. Narrowed eyes, hands gripping the armrests, just a touch firmer. He was giving Norton a chance. In each Anchetto step back. Norton ignored it. He leaned in, smirk firm. I mean, come on, Clint. When was the last time you made something that actually mattered? Something that connected with people? You're basically coasting on your reputation at this point, aren't you? That was the line. The line Norton should never have crossed. The audience gasped. One guest muttered, "Oh no." But Norton's smile stayed plastered in place, his smug satisfaction growing. Clint inhaled slowly, looked down for a moment, then back at Norton. His voice was quiet, but carried across the studio with the weight of decades of experience. You know what your problem is. Graham, you think being rude is the same as being funny. You think tearing people down makes you clever? It doesn't. It just makes you small. For the first time, Norton's grin faltered. Just slight livid. Everyone saw it. He waved a hand dismissively, trying to laugh it off. Clint Eastwood did not respond. He simply stood, clipped his microphone, and walked toward the exit. Each step, calm, deliberate, unstoppable. The cameras followed, the studio frozen. And in that silence, it was clear. Respect had a price, and Clint Eastwood had just reminded everyone what it was. Oh, come on, Clint. Don't be so sensitive. It's just a bit of fun. This is what we do here. We have a laugh. At whose expense? Clint asked, his voice calm, measured, but carrying unmistakable weight. You invited me here. I came out of respect for your show, for your audience. Respect is a two-way street. You don't get to insult me on your stage and call it entertainment. Norton shifted uneasily in his chair. The power balance had flipped. He was no longer the clever host in control, was a man who had underestimated the legend sitting across from him. The audience felt it. The other guests felt it. Norton's confident grin wavered. "Look, Clint, I think you're taking this the wrong way," Norton said, voice attempting placation. "I'm just trying to have a conversation." "No," Clint interrupted, firm, unwavering. "What you're trying to do is make yourself look good by making me look bad. I'm not participating in that." Norton's tone faltered as he tried to pivot to safer topics, awkwardly asking about Clint's family. But he couldn't escape the tension. He couldn't read the room. And then, in a moment of catastrophic misjudgment, he made it worse, bringing up one of Clint's old relationships with a crude, ill-placed joke. The audience didn't laugh. Silence swallowed the studio. Norton's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize about it was too late. Clint Eastwood stood, slowly, deliberately. Not a word at first, just a look that spoke volumes. Disappointment, disgust, absolute lack of respect. Then his voice cut through the stillness, low, precise, unflinching. "I've sat through a lot of interviews in my life, good ones, bad ones, everything in between. But I have never, and I mean never, been treated with such blatant disrespect. You invited me here as a guest, and you've spent the entire time trying to humiliate me. Why, for ratings, for laughs, whatever the reason, it's not worth my time." Norton tried to interject, voice trembling slightly. "Clint, please." "I didn't mean yes, you did," Clint said, cutting him off. "You meant every word. You thought you could take shots at me, and I'd just sit here because that's what guests do on your show. I'm not most guests. I don't play games with people who don't know how to show respect." He reached down and unclipped his microphone, placing it carefully on the chair he had just vacated. A simple gesture, but it carried monumental weight. Man asserting his dignity, drawing a line that would not be crossed. Norton's panic was visible. "Clint, come on. Let's just talk about this. I'm sorry if I offended you. That wasn't my intention." Clint looked at him one last time. Intentions don't matter when your actions speak louder than words. And your actions speak volumes about who you are. Without another word, he walked across the stage, past the band, past the cameras, past the stunned producers. He did not storm off. He did not create a scene. He left with the same composure and authority he had carried when he entered. The audience sat in awestruck silence. Some faces showed sympathy, others shock. But all understood the gravity of what had just happened. Clint Eastwood had spoken and the studio had listened. Norton sat frozen in his chair, his face a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. The other guests didn't know where to look. The cameras didn't know what to focus on. For several long 10 seconds, the studio held its breath. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The show usually alive with banter, energy, and controlled chaos had ground to a complete halt. Finally, Norton tried to salvage the moment. Tay turned to the camera, forcing a weak smile. "Well, that was unexpected. Clint Eastwood. Every nest wrong. Silent type indeed." The joke landed with a thud. The audience didn't laugh. They shifted uneasily in their seats. Norton's usual confidence had evaporated. He attempted to push on, moving to the next guest, but the energy was gone, the magic broken. Everyone in the studio knew they had just witnessed a host being put firmly in his place by someone who demanded deserved betor. What made it all the more striking was Clint's restraint. He could have yelled. He could have insulted Norton in return. He could have created a scene that would dominate headlines. But he didn't. He simply stood, said what needed to be said, and left. That quiet, unwavering resolve carried more power than any outburst ever could. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more clear. On one side, Clint Eastwood, a legend built on talent, hard work, and integrity. A man who commanded respect, not through ego, but because he had earned it over decades. A man who knew his worth and refused to let anyone, no matter how big their platform, diminish it. On the other, Norton, a man left rattled, exposed, and suddenly very small in the shadow of true greatness. On one side, Clint Eastwood, a man whose reputation, career, and self-respect were forged through decades of hard work, talent, and integrity. On the other, Graham Norton, a host who'd let his platform inflate his ego, who'd confused having a microphone with having the right to belittle his guests, who seemed to believe that a seat across from him was a license to mock and demean. That illusion shattered spectacularly. That night, the exchange underscored something vital about both the entertainment industry and basic human interaction. Agreeing to appear on a show doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. Sitting in a chair and answering questions doesn't make anyone property. Disrespect carries consequences. And Clint Eastwood understood that implicitly. He'd given Norton multiple chances to course correct, to show basic decency, to treat him like a human being, instead of a prop for punchlines. When those chances were ignored, when the mockery escalated, Clint did the only thing a person with self-respect could do. He walked away. Norton, meanwhile, seemed to operate under the assumption that guests existed to serve him, to fuel his humor, to set up his jokes. Somewhere along the line, he forgot or perhaps never learned that an interview is supposed to be a conversation between equals. A host may guide the discussion, but guidance does not equal superiority. It merely defines a role. The defining moment came in one simple, devastating line. You think being rude is the same as being funny. That cut straight to the heart of the problem. Norton's signature edginess had morphed into cruelty. Playful teasing had become humiliation. The line between cheeky and mean had vanished. By walking off the stage, Clint wasn't showing thin skin. He wasn't sulking or avoiding a joke. He was setting boundaries. He was saying clearly, some behavior is unacceptable regardless of ratings, laughs, or a television context. Fame does not obligate you to endure mistreatment, even if that mistreatment is disguised as entertainment. The audience's reactions mirrored the shift. Nervous laughter at the initial jabs faded as the questions grew sharper and the insults more personal. They sensed the tone had crossed the line. They watched uncomfortably as entertainment turned ugly. And when Clint finally stood, silence filled the studio, heavy, telling, inescapable. It was the sound of people recognizing a guest being bullied in real time, of laughter dying in the face of injustice. Even after Clint left, Norton tried to brush it off, attempting to frame the confrontation as mere sensitivity. But the attempt only highlighted his misjudgment. He had missed the lesson entirely. The host-guest relationship is meant to be collaborative, grounded in mutual respect. Guests bring their stories, their talent, their experiences, and they deserve to be treated as equals, not punching bags. A host's job is to create space for their guests to ask the questions that draw out stories, to guide a conversation that engages the audience. It's a partnership, not a power play. Norton either forgot that or maybe he never understood it. Clint's professionalism throughout the ordeal was remarkable. Even under constant provocation, even as Norton pushed relentlessly, he never lost his composure. No name-calling, no retaliatory jabs, just calm, clear statements of fact. That kind of self-control doesn't come from ego, it comes from confidence, from knowing your worth without needing to prove it. The moment Clint removed his microphone was quietly devastating. Not a dramatic toss, not a furious rip, it was deliberate, measured, final. Every movement carried meaning, a methodical severing of himself from the chaos around him. When Norton made his last-ditch plea, the panic in his voice was audible. He knew the show had collapsed, that he'd miscalculated, catastrophically. But apologies were useless now. The disrespect was already on full display, witnessed by millions, and nothing could undo it. Clint's parting words cut like a knife. Your intentions don't matter when your actions say everything I need to. Know about your character. That principle extends far beyond talk shows and celebrity interviews. Actions, not excuses, define us. You can claim you were joking, claim someone's too sensitive, claim you didn't mean harm, but consistent disrespect is louder than any explanation. Walking off the stage, head held high, dignity intact, Clint wasn't retreating. He wasn't surrendering. He was making a conscious choice to reject behavior that violated his values, to prioritize self-respect over placating someone else's ego. That quiet strength spoke louder than any shouted rebuttal ever could. Norton was left to face the fallout. The audience, stunned and silent, had just witnessed him humiliate himself while trying to humiliate a legend. The awkwardness was tangible. The energy of the studio had shifted irreparably. His attempts to move forward with the show felt hollow, forced, and entirely inadequate. You don't just bounce back from something like that. You can't treat someone so poorly, have them walk out on you, and then pretend everything's fine. The other guests on the couch that night were trapped in an impossible position. They'd seen it all, Norton crossing line after line, Clint giving chance after chance. And finally, a man standing up for himself and walking away. What were they supposed to do with that? How could the show continue as if nothing had happened? This incident was a stark reminder. Fame and platform do not excuse bad behavior. Norton had the home court advantage's stage. His audience primed to cheer him on, but none of it mattered when his actions were clearly out of line. No amount of privilege can shield you from the consequences of treating people poorly. Clint Eastwood didn't need to defend his legacy. Decades of iconic performances, critically acclaimed directing, and cultural impact across generations spoke for themselves. Norton's cheap shots couldn't diminish any of it. Yet Clint still stood up and said, "No, this isn't acceptable." Because some things are more important than avoiding confrontation. The exchange also revealed two very different approaches to conflict. Norton's method, attack, belittle, elevate himself by pushing others down. Clint's method, uphold his values, articulate the problem, and remove himself from toxicity. One seeks dominance, the other, dignity. Throughout the confrontation, Clint gave Norton multiple opportunities to course correct. Every disrespectful comment could have prompted an immediate exit, but he didn't. He stayed calm, redirected the conversation, gave the benefit of the doubt. Only when it became painfully clear that the disrespect was intentional and unrelenting did he act. That patience made his final decision to leave even more powerful. It wasn't a snap judgment or an overreaction. It was a measured, deliberate response to a pattern of behavior. The last resort after all other options had been exhausted. The silence after Clint's exit was perhaps the most damning moment. It was the sound of the studio processing what had just happened. The audience, once laughing nervously at Norton's jabs, now sat in stunned recognition that they'd witnessed something they shouldn't have. The show, built on the assumed cooperation between host and guest, had ground to a halt. And Norton's visible discomfort in those moments said it all. This wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't a scripted bit or a playful exchange gone slightly awry. This was a genuine rejection, a public rebuke, a moment where someone with real power and self-respect told Graham Norton, in front of everyone, that his behavior was unacceptable. There's no spinning that. No turning it into a funny anecdote. It sits there, heavy and undeniable. The lesson extends far beyond one talk show. It's about how we treat people, especially when we hold the advantage. Norton had the power control of the stage, the questions, the flow of conversation, but he wielded it poorly. He used it to punch down rather than to elevate, to dominate rather than to create. And when someone with true strength and self-respect pushed back, that apparent power evaporated. Clint Eastwood walking off that stage wasn't an ending. It was a statement about dignity, about respect, about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. It was a declaration that you don't have to accept poor treatment just because it comes from someone with a platform. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to participate. The image of Clint carefully removing his microphone, placing it down, and walking away with total composure is the image of someone who knows exactly who they are and what they stand for. No amount of goading could make him lose his cool. No insult could make him stoop. He recognized a situation beneath him and removed himself from it. That is real power. That is real strength. Norton had the opportunity to learn a hard lesson. That night, you can't hide behind the excuse of it's just entertainment when you're genuinely hurting someone. You can't claim it's my job when that job involves treating guests with contempt. And you can't expect people to endlessly tolerate disrespect. Just because you have a microphone, the entire incident stands as a testament to the importance of basic decency. It doesn't matter if someone is famous or unknown, young or old, powerful or not, everyone deserves respect. Everyone deserves their boundaries to be honored. Everyone has the right to walk away when those standards aren't met. Clint didn't need to shout, threaten, or insult back. He simply stood, stated the truth, and left. Sometimes the quietest actions speak the loudest. Sometimes the most powerful statement is refusing to engage with behavior that doesn't meet your standards.